I still remember the exact moment when my world shattered. It was our 30th wedding anniversary, a day that should have been filled with joy and celebration. Instead, it became a day of betrayal and heartache. For weeks, I had meticulously planned a surprise party for my wife, Linda. I wanted it to be perfect, inviting our closest friends and booking our favorite restaurant. She always claimed to adore surprises, though her enthusiasm had seemed to dwindle over the years. Little did I know she had been indulging in a different kind of surprise. I arrived at the restaurant early, making sure everything was set up just right. The lights were dimmed to create a cozy ambiance, and a jazz band played softly in the background. Our friends started trickling in, all eager to celebrate our 3 decades of marriage. As the clock ticked closer to the time I expected Linda to arrive, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. We had made it through so much together, or so I thought. Then, I saw her. My heart stopped. Linda walked in, but she wasn't alone. She was in the arms of a man I had never seen before. They were laughing, touching each other intimately, oblivious to the world around them. My blood ran cold as I watched them. It felt like a cruel joke, but it was all too real. She noticed me and froze, her smile fading into a look of pure horror. The man beside her quickly stepped back, clearly not anticipating the encounter. I stood there, numb, as our friends fell into an awkward silence, their eyes darting between Linda and me. Linda tried to regain her composure, attempting to introduce the man as an old friend. But the damage was done. I could see the truth in her eyes, and the facade of our perfect marriage crumbled in an instant. I didn't cause a scene. No, I simply turned and walked out, leaving her and our so-called friends behind. I needed to clear my head, to think. As I wandered the streets aimlessly, a plan began to form in my mind. I would teach her a lesson she would never forget. It was time to get revenge, and it would be elegant and thorough. But for now, I needed to gather my thoughts and prepare for the unexpected events that were sure to follow. This was just the beginning. The night after our anniversary, I found myself alone in our house. The silence was deafening, but it gave me the space I needed to think. I replayed the moment over and over in my head, each time feeling a fresh wave of anger and betrayal. Linda hadn't come home yet, which was no surprise. I imagined she was with her lover, trying to concoct some story to save face. I spent the night on the couch, not wanting to go into our bedroom. It felt tainted now. When I finally drifted off to sleep, it was restless and filled with nightmares of Linda and her lover. The next morning, I woke up determined. If she thought she could humiliate me, she had another thing coming. I started my day by calling our lawyer, Mr. Thompson. We had never needed his services for anything serious, but he was a friend of the family and trustworthy. "Hey, Jim," I greeted him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Good morning, Tom. What can I do for you?" "I need to discuss some personal matters. Can we meet today?" He sensed the urgency in my voice and agreed to see me that afternoon. As I hung up, I felt a sense of resolve. I wasn't going to let Linda get away with this. But first, I needed to gather evidence. Linda had always been a bit careless with her phone and laptop, often leaving them around the house. I took the opportunity to search through her messages and emails. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There were dozens of texts and emails between her and a man named Mark. The messages were explicit and left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. I scrolled through the texts, my stomach turning with each one. They had been seeing each other for over a year. She had lied to me repeatedly, saying she was out with friends or working late. The thought of them together made my blood boil, but I needed to stay focused. I took screenshots of the messages and saved them to a folder on my computer. Later that day, I met with Jim at his office. He listened attentively as I laid everything out, the anniversary, the affair, the texts. He was sympathetic but also professional. "Tom, I'm really sorry you're going through this," he said. "You have a few options. We can proceed with a divorce, but if you want to ensure she doesn't get more than she deserves, we need to be strategic about this." I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. I want her to understand the gravity of what she's done. She thinks she's untouchable, but she's wrong. Jim agreed to start the paperwork and advised me to gather more evidence. He also suggested that I talk to a private investigator, someone who could dig deeper into Linda's activities without raising suspicion. That evening, I called the investigator Jim recommended, a man named Frank. He was a no-nonsense type, with years of experience dealing with infidelity cases. He assured me he could find out everything I needed to know about Mark and their relationship. "Leave it to me, Tom," he said. "We'll get to the bottom of this." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time since the anniversary, I felt like I was in control. Linda had underestimated me, and now she was going to pay the price. I spent the next few days acting as if everything was normal. Linda returned home, trying to act like nothing had happened. She was distant, but that was nothing new. I played along, pretending to be the clueless husband, while secretly planning my next move. The unexpected events began to unfold as Frank uncovered more about Mark. He wasn't just some fling, he had a history, multiple affairs, a failed marriage, and a reputation as a manipulator. The more I learned, the more determined I became to see this through. Linda had no idea what was coming. She continued her charade, unaware that her world was about to be turned upside down. And I, the wronged husband, was ready to teach her a lesson she would never forget. The days following my meeting with Frank were a blur of strategic planning and carefully orchestrated moves. Frank's updates came regularly, each piece of information painting a clearer picture of Linda's deceit and Mark's character. It became clear that Mark was a professional liar, hopping from one affair to the next without any regard for the damage he left behind. This wasn't just about my wife anymore. It was about exposing Mark for the fraud he was and making Linda realize the magnitude of her betrayal. I decided to confront Linda, but on my terms. I had planned a small dinner at home, hoping to create an intimate setting where I could gauge her reactions and subtly introduce the idea that I knew more than she thought. I cooked her favorite meal, something I hadn't done in a while, and set the table with the same attention to detail that I had put into our anniversary dinner. She arrived home that evening, her face lighting up in surprise as she saw the effort I had put into the meal. "What's all this?" she asked, trying to mask her unease with a smile. "Just thought we could use a nice dinner together," I replied smoothly. "It's been a while since we've had some quality time." She seemed to relax a bit and join me at the table. We talked about mundane things at first: work, the weather, plans for the weekend. I could see her trying to act normal, but there was an underlying tension in the air. I let her lead the conversation until I felt the moment was right. "Linda," I began, setting down my fork and looking her straight in the eye, "there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." She stiffened, her fork pausing midair. "Oh, what's that?" "I've been feeling like there's been a distance between us lately, and I can't help but wonder if there's something you're not telling me." She forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "Tom, what are you talking about? Everything's fine." I leaned back in my chair, maintaining eye contact. "Is it? Because it doesn't feel that way to me. It feels like there's something or someone else occupying your time and attention." Her eyes widened, and for a split second I saw fear flash across her face. She quickly composed herself, shaking her head. "You're being ridiculous. You know how work has been." I nodded, pretending to accept her excuse. "I understand. Work can be stressful, but it's more than that, isn't it?" The silence was palpable. She looked down at her plate, her facade starting to crack. "Tom, I don't know what you're getting at." "Linda," I interrupted gently but firmly, "I know about Mark." Her head snapped up, her face pale. "What do you mean?" "I've seen the messages. I know about your affair." For a moment she was speechless, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find words. Finally she blurted out, "It's not what you think, isn't it?" I cut her off, my voice calm but cold. "You've been lying to me for over a year, sneaking around, making me look like a fool. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked genuinely remorseful, but I wasn't about to let her crocodile tears sway me. "Tom, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I said, standing up and moving around the table to stand in front of her. And now you're going to face the consequences. She looked up at me, fear and confusion in her eyes. What do you mean? I mean, I said, my voice steely, that I've been preparing for this. I've got a lawyer. I've got evidence, and I'm going to make sure you don't get away with this. She burst into tears, sobbing uncontrollably. Please, Tom, we can work this out. I love you. I shook my head. No, Linda. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it. I left her at the table, her sobs echoing in the otherwise silent house. I felt a strange sense of relief, knowing that the ball was now in my court. This was just the beginning of my plan. She had underestimated me, and now she was going to learn the hard way that I wasn't someone to be trifled with. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but smile to myself. I had set the wheels in motion. Linda's perfect little world was about to come crashing down, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. The days that followed our confrontation were a whirlwind of emotions and strategic planning. Linda tried to make amends, but I wasn't interested in her empty apologies. I was focused on executing my plan with precision. I enlisted Frank's help to dig deeper into Mark's background. It didn't take long for him to uncover some very interesting information. Mark had a history of affairs, and he was currently juggling multiple relationships, all of which were unbeknownst to Linda. Armed with this information, I knew I could turn the tables and expose his deceit. One evening, I decided to set my plan into motion. Linda was at home, anxiously trying to bridge the gap between us. I had been cold and distant, which only made her more desperate to win back my favor. I took advantage of this by suggesting we have dinner with some old friends, a cover for inviting Mark and one of his other lovers to our house. Linda agreed, thinking it was a step towards reconciliation. She had no idea what was coming. I contacted Mark, pretending to be none the wiser about his involvement with Linda, and invited him over for dinner. I also reached out to one of his other lovers, posing as a friend of Mark's, and invited her too. The stage was set. The evening of the dinner arrived, and I made sure everything was perfect. Linda, clueless about my true intentions, played the role of the doting wife. Mark arrived first, looking smug and confident. He had no idea I was aware of his double life. Shortly after, the other woman, Stephanie, arrived. The moment she walked in, I could see the shock on both Mark and Linda's faces. "Tom, this is unexpected," Mark stammered, trying to keep his composure. "Is it?" I asked, innocently, playing along. "I thought it would be nice to have a small gathering." Stephanie, oblivious to the underlying tension, greeted Mark with a kiss on the cheek. "Hey, babe. I didn't know you were friends with Tom and Linda." Linda's face turned pale, and I could see the realization dawning on her. She looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. Mark, on the other hand, was trying to keep his cool, but the cracks were beginning to show. We sat down for dinner, the atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. I let the conversation flow, waiting for the right moment to strike. Mark tried to keep up the pretense, but he was clearly uncomfortable. Linda was barely holding it together, her eyes darting between me and Mark, silently begging for an explanation. "So, Stephanie," I began casually, "how long have you and Mark been together?" Stephanie smiled, clearly unaware of the trap she was walking into. "We've been seeing each other for about 6 months now. He's such a wonderful man." Linda's fork clattered onto her plate, and she quickly excused herself to the bathroom. I watched her go, my heart pounding with a mix of satisfaction and anger. This was it, the moment of truth. 6 months, huh?" I said, turning to Mark. "That's interesting. Did you know that Linda and I have been married for 30 years, Mark, and that she's been seeing you for over a year?" Stephanie's smile faded, and she looked at Mark, confusion and hurt written all over her face. "What is he talking about, Mark?" Mark's face turned beet red, and he opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Linda returned from the bathroom, her eyes red and puffy. She had clearly been crying. "Mark," I said, my voice cold and hard, "it's time to come clean. Tell Stephanie the truth." Stephanie looked at Mark, her eyes filled with betrayal. "Mark, is this true?" Mark stammered. Stephanie, I can explain. Don't bother, I cut him off. It's clear what's been going on. You've been playing both of them, and who knows how many others. Linda's tears flowed freely now, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Stephanie stood up, fury written all over her face. I can't believe I fell for your lies, she spat at Mark. You're nothing but a fraud. Mark tried to reach out to her, but she slapped his hand away and stormed out of the house. The door slammed behind her, leaving an echo of finality in the room. Linda collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Tom, I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I never meant for any of this to happen. I stood there looking at the wreckage of our marriage and the devastation on Linda's face. Sorry doesn't cut it, Linda. You've destroyed everything we had. And now you have to live with the consequences. With that, I left the room, leaving her to face the reality of her actions. The sense of satisfaction I felt was tinged with sadness, but I knew it was necessary. Linda needed to understand the full extent of her betrayal, and Mark needed to be exposed for the lying cheat he was. As I walked out of the house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The first part of my plan had been executed perfectly. Now, it was time to finalize the divorce and move on with my life. Linda and Mark had underestimated me, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and strategic planning. Linda was a wreck, alternating between pleading for forgiveness and lashing out in anger. Her perfect little world had crumbled, and she had no one to blame but herself. I took a cold comfort in that. I met with Jim, my lawyer, again. He was impressed by how much evidence I had gathered and by the successful dinner confrontation. This will make the divorce proceedings much smoother, he assured me. We can argue infidelity and emotional distress, which should help you secure a favorable settlement. The divorce papers were served to Linda later that week. She was blindsided, of course, and immediately called me, her voice a mix of rage and desperation. Tom, you can't be serious. We can work this out. We've been together for 30 years. You can't just throw it all away. Linda, I replied calmly, you threw it all away when you decided to cheat on me. This is on you, not me. Accept the papers and let's end this as cleanly as possible. Her sobs on the other end of the line were a mix of guilt and realization. She knew she had no leg to stand on. Mark, unsurprisingly, had gone silent. He hadn't contacted Linda since the dinner. Typical coward. Meanwhile, Frank continued his investigation into Mark. He uncovered more dirt, financial troubles, more affairs, and a pattern of manipulation. It was enough to ensure that if Mark tried to fight back in any way, I would be ready. Linda moved out of the house a few days later. She went to stay with a friend, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and shattered memories. I watched her pack her things with a strange detachment. The woman I had loved for 30 years was now a stranger to me. In the meantime, I focused on securing my future. I met with a financial advisor to ensure that Linda wouldn't get more than she deserved. We went over our assets, and Jim assured me that with the evidence of infidelity, we could argue for a more favorable division. As the divorce proceedings began, Linda tried to play the victim. She told the judge that she was sorry, that she had made a mistake, and that she deserved a second chance. But the evidence I presented spoke louder than her words. The explicit messages, the photos from the dinner confrontation, and Frank's thorough report painted a clear picture of her deceit. The judge ruled in my favor. Linda was entitled to a fraction of what she had hoped for. The house remained mine, as did the majority of our savings. She got a modest settlement, enough to start over but far from what she had envisioned. She looked devastated as the verdict was read, but I felt no pity. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. With the legal battle behind me, I began to rebuild my life. I changed the locks on the house, redecorated, and made it my own again. The process was cathartic, a way to cleanse the remnants of our broken marriage. One evening, as I was sorting through old photographs, I found an album from our early years. The memories were bittersweet, a stark contrast to the reality we had ended up in. But instead of feeling sorrow, I felt a sense of closure. Those times were gone, and it was time to look forward. I also decided to reach out to some old friends and reconnect. It had been too long since I had truly socialized, and I needed to remind myself that life went on. I found support in places I hadn't expected, and slowly I began to heal. Linda, on the other hand, struggled to move on. Mark had abandoned her, and she was left to pick up the pieces of her life. She tried reaching out to me a few times, but I ignored her calls and messages. I had nothing more to say to her. The unexpected twist came a few weeks later. Frank called me with news about Mark. "You're not going to believe this," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Mark's been arrested. It turns out he was involved in some shady business deals and he's facing serious charges." I couldn't help but laugh. Karma had finally caught up with him. It was the perfect ending to this chapter of my life. Mark and Linda had both paid the price for their deceit, and I was free to move forward. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and I had come out stronger on the other side. My life was my own again, and the future was full of possibilities. With the divorce finalized and the chaos of the past few months behind me, I focused on rebuilding my life. The house, once a battleground of emotions, became a sanctuary. I redecorated, getting rid of old furniture and memories associated with Linda. I filled the space with new, vibrant pieces that reflected my fresh start. I also decided to take up some new hobbies. I joined a hiking club, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. It felt liberating to explore the outdoors, breathing in the fresh air and pushing my physical limits. The club members were friendly and welcoming, and it didn't take long for me to form new friendships. One Saturday, during a particularly challenging hike, I found myself walking beside a woman named Emily. She was around my age, with a kind smile and an infectious laugh. We struck up a conversation, and I found out she had recently gone through a divorce as well. There was an instant connection, a mutual understanding of the pain and the desire to move forward. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I grew closer. We went on more hikes together, shared stories of our past, and slowly I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. She was refreshing, honest, and most importantly, she had a genuine warmth that drew me in. One evening, after a particularly beautiful hike, we sat on a hilltop watching the sunset. Emily turned to me, her eyes reflecting the golden hues of the sky. "Tom, I've really enjoyed getting to know you these past few weeks. It's been a long time since I've felt this comfortable with someone." I smiled, feeling the same way. "I feel the same, Emily. Meeting you has been one of the best things to come out of all this." She reached out and took my hand. "I know we've both been through a lot, but maybe this is our chance to start over. Together." It was a simple statement, but it held so much promise. I squeezed her hand, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I'd like that." As our relationship blossomed, I felt myself healing. Emily was a constant source of support and joy, and being with her made me realize that I could love again. We took things slow, both of us wary of rushing into anything too quickly. But with each passing day, I grew more certain that she was someone I wanted in my life. Linda, meanwhile, tried to reach out a few more times, but I remained distant. She sent a few letters, apologizing and asking for another chance. I read them but never responded. I had no interest in reopening old wounds. My focus was on the future, not the past. One day, I received a final letter from Linda. It was different from the others, less desperate, more resigned. She admitted that she had made a huge mistake and that she was struggling to move on. She wished me well and hoped I could find happiness. It was a small, belated gesture of closure, and I appreciated it for what it was. With Mark behind bars and Linda out of my life, I felt truly free. I continued to build my new life, investing time in my hobbies and nurturing my relationship with Emily. We traveled together, exploring new places and creating new memories. Each adventure brought us closer, and I felt a happiness I hadn't known in years. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to me with a smile. "You know, Tom, I think we've both come a long way. I'm really happy we found each other." I nodded, feeling the same contentment. "Me too, Emily. Here's to new beginnings." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized that life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. What had started as a nightmare had led me to a new chapter filled with hope and love. I had learned that sometimes the worst experiences could lead to the best outcomes, and with Emily by my side, I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. As my relationship with Emily deepened, we started blending our lives more seamlessly. We spent weekends together, exploring new hiking trails, trying out new recipes, and even taking up dancing lessons, which turned out to be a lot of fun despite our initial awkwardness. Life felt full and vibrant, and I was genuinely happy. However, life has a funny way of throwing curveballs just when you think you have everything figured out. One afternoon, I received an unexpected message on social media from an old friend, David. We had lost touch over the years, but his message brought back a flood of memories. "Hey Tom, it's been a long time. I heard about what happened with Linda. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm actually in town for a few days and was wondering if you'd like to catch up. It would be great to see you." I hesitated at first. David had been one of our mutual friends, and I wasn't sure how much he knew about the situation. But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet him for coffee the next day. When I arrived at the cafe, David was already there, looking almost exactly the same as I remembered. We greeted each other warmly and sat down with our drinks. "It's really good to see you, Tom," David said. "I'm sorry we lost touch. Life just got in the way, I guess." I nodded, sipping my coffee. "Yeah, it happens. So how have you been?" We spent the next hour catching up on life. David had moved to another city, gotten married, and started a family. He seemed genuinely happy, which was comforting to see. Eventually, the conversation turned to Linda. "So I heard about the divorce," David said gently. "I'm really sorry, Tom. I had no idea what was going on." "Thanks, David. It was tough, but I'm moving on," I replied, not wanting to dwell on the past. David looked hesitant for a moment before speaking again. "Actually, there's something I need to tell you. I wasn't sure if I should, but I think you deserve to know." I tensed, unsure of what he was about to reveal. "What is it?" "Linda reached out to me a few months ago. She was a mess, Tom. She told me about the affair and everything that happened, but she also mentioned that she regretted it deeply and wanted to find a way to make amends." I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a strange sense of closure. "Why are you telling me this now?" David sighed. "Because I think you should hear her out. I'm not saying you should forgive her or get back together, but maybe talking to her will give you some peace." I thought about it for a moment. Linda had tried to reach out to me multiple times, and I had ignored her. Maybe it was time to hear her side of the story to get the closure I needed. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll talk to her, but I'm not making any promises." David nodded, understanding. "Just give it a chance, for your own sake." That evening I called Linda. She sounded surprised but relieved to hear from me. We agreed to meet at a park the next day, a neutral place where we could talk without the weight of our past bearing down on us. When I arrived at the park, Linda was already there, sitting on a bench. She looked different, older, more tired. The confident, somewhat cold woman I had known was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely remorseful. "Hi, Tom," she said softly as I approached. "Hi, Linda," I replied, sitting down beside her. There was a long, awkward silence before she finally spoke. "Thank you for meeting me. I know I don't deserve it." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I've made so many mistakes," she said, her voice trembling. "What I did to you was unforgivable. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I was selfish and stupid, and I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw the depth of her regret. It was hard to stay angry when faced with such raw emotion. "Linda, you hurt me deeply," I said quietly. "You broke my trust, and that's something I can't just forget. But I appreciate your apology. It means more than you know." She wiped her tears, nodding. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry and that I hope you can find happiness." We talked for a while longer, sharing our experiences since the divorce. It was a difficult conversation, but it brought a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. By the end of it, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. As I walked back to my car, I thought about how far I had come. Meeting Emily, reconnecting with old friends, and now finding closure with Linda. It all felt like part of a larger journey towards healing. That evening, I told Emily about my meeting with Linda. She listened patiently, offering her support and understanding. "I'm glad you were able to find some closure," she said, holding my hand. "It's important to let go of the past so we can fully embrace the future." I smiled, feeling grateful for her presence in my life. "Thank you, Emily. I couldn't have done this without you." As we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized how much I had to be thankful for. Life had thrown me some unexpected challenges, but it had also given me the strength to overcome them. With Emily by my side, I was ready to embrace whatever the future held, knowing that I had finally found peace. Life began to settle into a comforting rhythm after that meeting with Linda. The closure I found allowed me to fully invest in my relationship with Emily and explore new aspects of myself. Our bond deepened, and we found joy in the simplest things, like cooking together or spending lazy Sundays watching movies. One Saturday morning, Emily and I decided to visit a local farmer's market. It was a bright, sunny day, and the market was bustling with activity. Vendors were selling fresh produce, homemade jams, and artisanal crafts. As we walked through the stalls hand in hand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. "Look at these strawberries, Tom," Emily exclaimed, holding up a basket of the ripest, reddest strawberries I'd ever seen. "We should get some." I smiled, loving how excited she got over the little things. "Absolutely. And maybe some of that honey over there?" We ended up buying more than we had planned. Fresh vegetables, a loaf of crusty bread, a jar of honey, and, of course, the strawberries. It felt good to be out in the world, enjoying the day with someone who made everything feel new and exciting. As we walked back to the car, arms full of our market haul, Emily turned to me. "You know, Tom, I've been thinking, how would you feel about us moving in together?" Her question caught me by surprise, but in the best way possible. I had been thinking about it too, wondering when the right time would be to bring it up. "I think that's a great idea, Emily. I'd love for us to live together." She beamed, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "Really? Oh, this is going to be so much fun. We can make your place feel like home for both of us." We spent the next few weeks planning the move. Emily's apartment was small and cozy, but my house had more space for us to grow into. She started moving her things in bit by bit, and soon the house began to feel more vibrant and alive. Her presence brought a warmth that had been missing for so long. One evening, after a long day of unpacking, we sat on the porch with a bottle of wine, watching the sunset. Emily snuggled close to me, and I wrapped my arm around her, feeling utterly content. "This feels right," she said softly, "like we're building something really special." I kissed the top of her head. "It does. I'm so glad we found each other, Emily. You've brought so much joy into my life." She smiled up at me. "And you've brought so much love into mine, Tom. I can't wait to see what the future holds for us." As we continued to blend our lives, we made new memories and traditions. We hosted dinner parties with our friends, explored new hiking trails, and even started a small garden in the backyard. Life felt full and meaningful in a way I hadn't experienced before. Meanwhile, Linda's presence in my life continued to fade. She had moved to another city, seeking a fresh start. We kept our contact to a minimum, only communicating about the final details of our divorce settlement. It was clear that she was struggling to rebuild her life, but I had made peace with it. Her journey was her own, and I had moved on. One day, as Emily and I were tending to our garden, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Tom, have you ever thought about what you want to do next? Now that things have settled down, I mean." I paused, considering her question. "I've actually been thinking about starting a business, something related to the outdoors, maybe a hiking gear shop or a guided tour service. What do you think?" Her face lit up. "I think that's a fantastic idea. You've always been passionate about hiking, and you have so much knowledge to share. I could help with the marketing and planning. We'd make a great team." Her enthusiasm was contagious, and I felt a surge of excitement. "You're right. We would make a great team. Let's do it." Over the next few months, we poured our energy into bringing the idea to life. We researched the market, wrote a business plan, and scouted locations. It was a lot of hard work, but it was also incredibly rewarding to build something together. We finally opened our hiking gear shop, Trailblazers, with a small but enthusiastic crowd of friends and new customers. The store was filled with high-quality gear, maps of local trails, and a cozy corner where people could gather to share their hiking experiences. The grand opening was a success, and as we celebrated that night, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Life had taken me on an unexpected journey, but it had led me to a place of happiness and fulfillment. As Emily and I stood in the middle of our bustling shop, surrounded by friends and well-wishers, she leaned in and whispered, "We did it, Tom. This is just the beginning." I smiled, pulling her close. "Yes, it is, and I can't wait to see where this adventure takes us next." With Emily by my side and our new business thriving, I knew that the future was bright. The pain of the past had faded, replaced by the joy of new beginnings, and as I looked around at the life we were building together, I knew that this was where I was meant to be. The next few months at Trailblazers were a whirlwind of activity and growth. Emily and I poured our hearts into the business, and it quickly became a gathering place for the local hiking community. We hosted guided hikes, educational workshops, and even a few weekend camping trips. Our passion for the outdoors was contagious, and it felt like we were truly making a difference in people's lives. One evening, as we were closing up shop, Emily received a phone call. Her face fell as she listened, and when she hung up, she looked visibly shaken. "What's wrong?" I asked, concerned. "It's my father," she said, her voice trembling. "He had a heart attack. He's in the hospital." Without hesitation, we locked up the store and rushed to the hospital. Emily's father, Robert, was a kind and gentle man who had always supported her in everything she did. Seeing him lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, was a sobering sight. The doctors assured us that he was stable, but it was clear that he had a long road to recovery ahead of him. Emily's mother, Mary, was there too, looking worn out and worried. We stayed with them as long as we could, offering support and comfort. Over the next few weeks, Emily spent most of her time at the hospital, and I took on more responsibilities at Trailblazers. It was exhausting, but I wanted to do everything I could to support her. Robert's condition slowly improved, but it was a difficult and emotional time for all of us. One night, after a particularly long day, Emily and I sat on the porch, our usual sanctuary. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes and her usual spark dimmed. "Tom, I don't know how much longer I can do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so worried about my dad, and I feel like I'm letting you down with the store." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not letting me down, Emily. You're doing everything you can for your dad, and that's what matters. The store will be fine. We'll get through this together." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she leaned into me, finding comfort in my embrace. "Thank you, Tom. I don't know what I'd do without you." We sat there in silence for a while, watching the stars. I thought about how far we had come and how much we had overcome together. This was just another challenge, and I knew we could face it head on. As the days turned into weeks, Robert's condition slowly improved, and Emily was able to spend more time at Trailblazers. We found a new rhythm, balancing work and family, and supporting each other every step of the way. One afternoon while Emily was at the hospital, I received a surprising visit at the store. Linda walked in, looking more composed than the last time I had seen her. My heart skipped a beat, but I remained calm. "Tom," she said, her voice tentative, "can we talk?" I nodded, leading her to a quiet corner of the store. "What brings you here, Linda?" She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I wanted to see how you're doing, and to apologize again. I know I hurt you, and I've been working on myself, trying to understand why I did what I did." I listened, feeling a mix of emotions. "I appreciate that, Linda, but I've moved on. I'm happy with Emily, and we're building a life together." A sad smile crossed her face. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve happiness, Tom. I just wanted to make amends, to close that chapter of my life. We talked for a while longer, catching up on each other's lives. It felt strange, but also cathartic to have this conversation. By the end of it, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. As Linda left the store, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had finally made peace with the past, and I was ready to fully embrace the future with Emily. That evening, when Emily returned from the hospital, I told her about Linda's visit. She listened, her expression thoughtful. "I'm glad you got the closure you needed," she said, taking my hand. "We've both been through so much, and I'm grateful we found each other." I kissed her hand, feeling a deep sense of love and gratitude. "Me too, Emily. Me too." Robert's health continued to improve, and life slowly returned to normal. Emily and I focused on expanding Trailblazers, introducing new programs and events to keep the community engaged. Business was booming, and we were happier than ever. One day, as we were planning our next big event, Emily looked at me with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Tom, what do you think about hosting a charity hike? We could raise money for the local hospital's cardiac unit." I grinned, loving the idea. "That's brilliant, Emily. Let's do it." We threw ourselves into the planning, reaching out to local businesses for sponsorships and promoting the event through every channel we had. The response was overwhelming, and the day of the hike we had a huge turnout. As we led the group through the trails, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. We had built something truly special, not just a business, but a community. And we were using that community to give back in meaningful ways. At the end of the hike, as we gathered for a group photo, Emily slipped her hand into mine. "Look at what we've accomplished, Tom. This is amazing." I looked around at the smiling faces, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. It really is, and this is just the beginning. With Emily by my side, I knew that we could face any challenge that came our way. Life had thrown us some unexpected twists, but we had come out stronger on the other side. Together, we were unstoppable, and I couldn't wait to see where our journey would take us next. The next few months at Trailblazers were a whirlwind of activity and growth. Emily and I poured our hearts into the business, and it quickly became a gathering place for the local hiking community. We hosted guided hikes, educational workshops, and even a few weekend camping trips. Our passion for the outdoors was contagious, and it felt like we were truly making a difference in people's lives. One evening, as we were closing up shop, Emily received a phone call. Her face fell as she listened, and when she hung up, she looked visibly shaken. "What's wrong?" I asked, concerned. "It's my father," she said, her voice trembling. "He had a heart attack. He's in the hospital." Without hesitation, we locked up the store and rushed to the hospital. Emily's father, Robert, was a kind and gentle man who had always supported her in everything she did. Seeing him lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, was a sobering sight. The doctors assured us that he was stable, but it was clear that he had a long road to recovery ahead of him. Emily's mother, Mary, was there too, looking worn out and worried. We stayed with them as long as we could, offering support and comfort. Over the next few weeks, Emily spent most of her time at the hospital, and I took on more responsibilities at Trailblazers. It was exhausting, but I wanted to do everything I could to support her. Robert's condition slowly improved, but it was a difficult and emotional time for all of us. One night, after a particularly long day, Emily and I sat on the porch, our usual sanctuary. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, and her usual spark dimmed. "Tom, I don't know how much longer I can do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so worried about my dad, and I feel like I'm letting you down with the store." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not letting me down, Emily. You're doing everything you can for your dad, and that's what matters. The store will be fine. We'll get through this together." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she leaned into me, finding comfort in my embrace. "Thank you, Tom. I don't know what I'd do without you." We sat there in silence for a while, watching the stars. I thought about how far we had come and how much we had overcome together. This was just another challenge, and I knew we could face it head on. As the days turned into weeks, Robert's conditions slowly improved, and Emily was able to spend more time at Trailblazers. We found a new rhythm, balancing work and family, and supporting each other every step of the way. One afternoon, while Emily was at the hospital, I received a surprising visit at the store. Linda walked in, looking more composed than the last time I had seen her. My heart skipped a beat, but I remained calm. "Tom," she said, her voice tentative, "can we talk?" I nodded, leading her to a quiet corner of the store. "What brings you here, Linda?" She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I wanted to see how you're doing, and to apologize again. I know I hurt you, and I've been working on myself, trying to understand why I did what I did." I listened, feeling a mix of emotions. "I appreciate that, Linda, but I've moved on. I'm happy with Emily, and we're building a life together." A sad smile crossed her face. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve happiness, Tom. I just wanted to make amends, to close that chapter of my life." We talked for a while longer, catching up on each other's lives. It felt strange but also cathartic to have this conversation. By the end of it, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. As Linda left the store, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had finally made peace with the past, and I was ready to fully embrace the future with Emily. That evening, when Emily returned from the hospital, I told her about Linda's visit. She listened, her expression thoughtful. "I'm glad you got the closure you needed," she said, taking my hand. "We've both been through so much, and I'm grateful we found each other." I kissed her hand, feeling a deep sense of love and gratitude. "Thank you, Emily. I couldn't have done this without you." Robert's health continued to improve, and life slowly returned to normal. Emily and I focused on expanding Trailblazers, introducing new programs and events to keep the community engaged. Business was booming, and we were happier than ever. One day, as we were planning our next big event, Emily looked at me with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Tom, what do you think about hosting a charity hike? We could raise money for the local hospital's cardiac unit." I grinned, loving the idea. "That's brilliant, Emily. Let's do it." We threw ourselves into the planning, reaching out to local businesses for sponsorships and promoting the event through every channel we had. The response was overwhelming, and the day of the hike, we had a huge turnout. As we led the group through the trails, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. We had built something truly special, not just a business, but a community, and we were using that community to give back in meaningful ways. At the end of the hike, as we gathered for a group photo, Emily slipped her hand into mine. "Look at what we've accomplished, Tom. This is amazing." I looked around at the smiling faces, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. It really is, and this is just the beginning. With Emily by my side, I knew that we could face any challenge that came our way. Life had thrown us some unexpected twists, but we had come out stronger on the other side. Together, we were unstoppable, and I couldn't wait to see where our journey would take us next.